So I think I'd like to talk today about just kind of an exercise we can do to bring compassion into different moments of our lives that's really drawn from Buddhist practices, like Shenrezig practice and things like this. So I think one obstacle that can be present when we're trying to make real changes in our lives, like to try and become a more compassionate person or whatever goal we're trying to move toward, is this observation that what we're working toward and where we are now seems very far apart. And I think it's easy to get demoralized in the face of that. It's easy, particularly when we see ourselves struggling or see ourselves having a hard time. That can be very painful. And it can be easy, in the face of that pain or that disappointment or the shame that can come up, it can be easy just to distract ourselves and to avoid and pay attention to something else or do something else, throw ourselves into something else, and to forget about that direction we want to move in. And so I'd like to encourage folks, when that happens, to try, rather than getting caught up and buying into that idea that, oh, I can't do that, I'm nothing like that, and giving up, to try to do an imaginal exercise where you imagine, if I was like this, if I had these characteristics, what would I understand? How would I feel? How would I think? What would I do? If we think about the Shenrezig practice and other practices, there's a lot of that in this. In compassion-focused therapy, we call it the compassionate self-exercise, but it's in some ways very, very similar. The idea is, rather than getting caught up in, am I like this, am I not like this, to imagine, if I had these qualities that I want to have, qualities like a deep kindness, a wish to benefit all sentient beings, wisdom, the ability to look deeply into suffering, see the causes and conditions that contribute to it, and gain the understanding needed to help make things better. And courage, right? Courage to face the things that make me uncomfortable so I can keep going and really do this work. To imagine what it would be like if I had those characteristics already, if I was filled with kindness and wisdom and courage and compassion. How would I feel? What would I think? What would my motivation be in this situation? What would I want to do? And what would I do? And in some ways, this is kind of a method acting technique. If you're an actor, very often you'll be asked to portray people in a play or on film that aren't anything like you. And so what these actors do is they try to get in the head of those folks and think, okay, if I had these characteristics, if I was like this, what would I feel like? What would I do? Well, we can do that too. Only we create the idea of the kind of person we want to be and try to imagine feeling, thinking, and interacting from that perspective. Now, that can be very difficult if we're in a situation that triggers feelings of threat in us or that really is difficult for us. So in those times, we can start by looking at those situations retrospectively. So maybe a little bit later, when we go back on that situation we struggled with earlier in the day, to remember it and then imagine, if I was back in that situation as this kind, wise, courageous, compassionate version of me, what would I have understood? How might have behaved or handled that differently? And the idea is that the more we do that, the easier that perspective is to shift into. You're developing the habits that go along with being kind and wise and courageous and compassionate. And at the neurological level, you're developing the patterns in your brain and strengthening the patterns in your brain that are associated with those ways of being. And so what happens is that over time, that compassionate version of you that you're striving to become and that current version of you that's existing here and now get closer and closer and closer and closer as those habits are formed and strengthened. And what's really neat is when you just see them begin to manifest I remember, I'll close with just an example from some of the groups I did in the compassion-focused therapy for anger groups in the prisons. One of the coolest moments in those groups is sometimes you'd have guys come in and you could see at the beginning of the group, they were just waiting to speak. They couldn't wait to say. And finally you say, okay, it looks like you've got something to say there. And they say, my compassionate self showed up yesterday. And you're like, really? Do tell. Well, I was walking by and I'm standing in line at the chow line and someone cut in front of me. And instead of getting angry and telling him to shove it, I thought, gosh, they must be in a real hurry. Yeah, I'll let them go ahead. Or someone said something nasty to them to try and provoke them. And instead of getting mad and starting a fight or yelling, they'd think, gosh, what must that person's day be like? That they would try to bring me down by just saying something random out of the blue. Just noticing that. So I'd like to encourage you to try that out. All right, as you go through these moments of your life, maybe a few times a day, just try to imagine, if I was right here, right now in this situation, but it was the best version of me. I was at my very best, my kindest, my wisest, my most courageous, my most compassionate. What would I understand? How would I feel? What would I think? What would I want to do? And then maybe act from that perspective.